France, 1918, the Western Front. To understand why the arrival of the American shotgun was such a pivotal moment in military history, you first have to understand the terrifying geography of the First World War. We often think of World War I as a war of artillery and machine guns, weapons of distance, but the reality for the infantrymen was claustrophobic, intimate, and wet. By the time the American Expeditionary Forces, the Doughboys, arrived in force, the war had devolved into a stalemate of mud. The trench lines stretched from the Swiss border to the North Sea. These weren't just ditches, they were complex subterranean cities, and they were designed with a specific architecture of survival. Trenches were never built in straight lines. They were dug in zigzags, known as traverses. This was done to prevent an artillery shell or a grenade blast from traveling down the entire line and killing everyone. But this design created a deadly tactical problem. It meant that every corner was a blind spot, every turn was an ambush. Combat distances in 1918 weren't measured in hundreds of yards, they were measured in feet and inches. And this is where the standard-issue rifle failed. The American soldier carried the M1903 Springfield. The German carried the Gewehr 98. These were masterpieces of 19th century engineering. They were bolt-action rifles designed for open-field warfare, where you could spot an enemy at 500 yards, take a breath, aim, and fire. They were elegant, accurate, and powerful. But in a trench raid, elegance is a liability. Imagine you are an American private on a night raid in the Argonne forest. It's pitch black. The rain is relentless. You jump down into a German trench. The floor is slick with slime. The walls are narrow, barely shoulder-width apart. You are holding your M1903 Springfield. The rifle itself is 43 inches long. You have fixed your bayonet, adding another 16 inches of steel to the barrel. You are now holding a 5-foot-long spear in a 3-foot-wide ditch. Suddenly, you round a traverse. A German soldier is standing right there, less than 6 feet away. This is the moment the rifle fails you. You try to bring the weapon up to aim. The barrel hits the mud wall on your left. The stock catches on a sandbag on your right. The sheer length of the weapon makes it clumsy, slow, and heavy. It feels like trying to swing a baseball bat in a telephone booth. You manage to pull the trigger. Bang! The .30-06 round hits the German in the shoulder, or maybe it misses entirely in the panic. Now comes the fatal flaw. To fire again, you have to unlock the bolt, pull it back to eject the spent casing, push it forward to strip a new round from the magazine, and lock it down again. In a training camp, you can do this in 2 seconds, but in the mud, with adrenaline flooding your veins and an enemy lunging at you, those 2 seconds are an eternity. While you are struggling to cycle your bolt, the German isn't waiting. He is rushing you. He has a club, a sharpened shovel, or a semi-automatic Luger pistol. He doesn't need to be accurate, he just needs to be fast. The rifle, designed for the gentlemanly warfare of the 19th century, has become a useless stick. The deadlock of the trenches wasn't just about barbed wire and machine guns, it was a deadlock of personal weaponry. The armies of Europe had equipped their men with sniper rifles to fight a knife fight. Officers watched in horror as raid after raid failed because their men couldn't clear a trench fast enough. They would enter a bunker, fire 1 shot, and then be swarmed before they could chamber a second round. The precision of the rifle was irrelevant. The power of the cartridge was overkill. What the American soldier needed wasn't a weapon that could hit a coin at 300 yards. He needed a weapon that could clear a hallway in a fraction of a second. He needed a weapon that didn't require aiming. He needed a broom to sweep the trenches clean. And so the rifle, The king of the battlefield for centuries was pushed aside for something far older, far cruder, and infinitely more brutal. The deadlock had to be broken, not by precision, but by a wall of lead. The stage was set for the entrance of the Model 1987. Into the muddy, claustrophobic nightmare of the Western Front, the United States Army brought a weapon that was distinctly American. It wasn't a precision instrument born in a European laboratory. It was a rugged tool forged in the dust of the frontier. It was the brainchild of the greatest firearms designer who ever lived, John Moses Browning. The weapon was the Winchester Model 1907, but the soldiers didn't call it that. They called it the trench broom. To the casual observer, it looked like a standard pump-action shotgun, the kind used by farmers to defend their livestock or hunters to shoot ducks. But the version issued to the doughboys in 1917 was a modified beast, evolved specifically for the violence of close-quarters combat. Browning's design was genius in its simplicity, but terrifying in its application. The military modification involved 3 key changes that transformed a sporting gun into a war machine. First, there was the heat shield. In the frenzy of battle, a soldier might fire dozens of rounds in seconds. A shotgun barrel gets hot enough to sear human skin instantly. So the Army attached a perforated steel shroud over the barrel, a cheese grater, that allowed the soldier to grip the front of the gun even when the steel beneath was glowing hot. Second was the bayonet lug. The designers understood that ammunition runs out. When the gun went dry, it needed to become a spear. They fitted the Model 97 with the M1917 bayonet, a 16-inch blade. With the bayonet attached, the shotgun was as imposing as a medieval pike. But the third feature, the soul of the beast, was a mechanical quirk that John Browning had designed into the trigger mechanism. It was called slam fire. Modern pump-action shotguns have a safety feature called a trigger disconnector. This means that after you pump the shotgun to load a new shell, you have to release the trigger and pull it again to fire. It forces a pause. It forces a rhythm. Pump, aim, pull, bang. The Model 1987 had no such safety. It had no disconnector. This meant that a soldier could hold the trigger down and never let go. As long as the trigger was depressed, the weapon would fire the instant the pump handle was slammed forward and the bolt locked into battery. The rhythm changed from pump, aim, pull to a violent, continuous motion. Slam, bang, slam, bang, slam, bang. In the hands of a trained soldier, the Model 97 could empty its tube of 6 shells in less than 2 seconds. Let's look at the mathematics of that violence. The standard load was a 12-gauge brass or paper shell filled with .00 buckshot. Each shell contained 9 hardened lead pellets, each roughly the size of a .32 caliber pistol bullet. When a soldier slam-fired a Model 97, he wasn't firing 6 bullets. He was putting 54 projectiles into the air in the blink of an eye. In the narrow confines of a German trench, which might be only 3 feet wide, aim was irrelevant. You didn't need to see the enemy clearly. You didn't need to align sights. You simply pointed the barrel down the corridor and worked the pump as fast as your arm could move. The result was a cone of death. The spread of the buckshot meant that at close range it was nearly impossible to miss. While a German soldier with a bolt-action Gewehr 98 was struggling to cycle a single round, the American with the trench broom had already unleashed a storm of lead that shredded wood, fabric, and flesh alike. It was a weapon of overwhelming suppression. It turned the complex tactical problem of clearing a bunker into a simple exercise of brute force. The Model 1987 didn't just kill the enemy, it swept them away. It was loud, it was brutal, and it was so effective that it terrified the most hardened shock troops of the German Empire. The slam-fire beast had arrived, and it brought a new kind of industrial slaughter to the trenches. September 19, 1918. A diplomatic cable traveled from Berlin, passed through the Swiss embassy, and landed with a heavy thud on the desk of the American Secretary of State, Robert Lansing. The contents of the message were startling. It was a formal protest from the German imperial government, but it wasn't asking for peace. It was a cry of outrage. The German High Command, the masters of the most efficient war machine in history, were claiming that the Americans were fighting unfair. They were claiming that the United States Army was being barbaric. The subject of their terror? The Winchester Model 1897 shotgun. In the cable, Berlin cited Article 23E of the Hague Convention, which prohibited weapons calculated to cause unnecessary suffering. The German government argued that the American trench gun, loaded with 00 buckshot, inflicted wounds that were too gruesome, too ragged, and too difficult to treat. They painted a picture of the American doughboy not as a soldier, but as a war criminal carrying a weapon of mass mutilation. Then came the threat. The cable ended with a chilling ultimatum. The German government serves notice that every prisoner found to have in his possession such guns or ammunition belonging thereto will be punished with death. To the American commanders reading this in France, the audacity was breathtaking. It was a moment of hypocrisy so profound it almost defied logic. Consider who was making the complaint. This was the same German army that in 1915 at Ypres had released 168 tons of chlorine gas, watching as thousands of Allied soldiers drowned in their own dissolving lungs. This was the army that had introduced the flamethrowers, the flamethrower at Hooge, turning living men into human torches with jets of liquid fire. This was the army whose soldiers carried bayonets with serrated sawback edges, designed not just to stab, but to tear the guts out of a man when pulled free. Gas that blinded and choked, fire that melted flesh, saw-toothed steel. The Germans had introduced all of these horrors to the modern battlefield without a second thought. Yet here they were, clutching their pearls and crying foul because the Americans had brought a shotgun to a trench fight. The hypocrisy revealed a deeper truth. The Germans weren't protesting because the shotgun was cruel. They were protesting because it was effective. They were terrified. The shotgun was stopping their elite stormtroopers cold. It was the one weapon that could counter their infiltration tactics. The American response was swift and cold as ice. General John J. Pershing, the commander of the AEF, didn't blink. He didn't offer to withdraw the weapon. He didn't apologize. Instead, he issued a counter-threat that would make history. Pershing's reply was essentially this: if Germany executes a single American prisoner for carrying a shotgun, the United States will select a German prisoner and execute him in retaliation. For one of ours, one of yours. Furthermore, Pershing didn't stop the distribution of the shotguns. He ordered more. He famously suppressed the censorship of the German protest in American newspapers, believing that if the American public knew the Germans were threatening to execute their boys, it would only harden the nation's resolve. The poker game of death had been called. Germany held a handful of gas canisters and flamethrowers. America held a pump-action shotgun, and America wasn't folding. The result? Silence. There is no record of the German army ever carrying out their threat. They realized that General Pershing was not a man to be trifled with. The protest quietly died in the diplomatic channels. The barbaric stick proved to be louder than the German complaint. The Wehrmacht continued to face the trench broom until the very last hour of the war, learning the hard way that in a war they had made so brutal, crying about fairness was the ultimate irony.
September 26, 1918. The Meuse-Argonne Offensive. The Argonne Forest was not a battlefield in the traditional sense. It was a tangled, green hell. The trees were so thick they blotted out the sun, and the ground was a labyrinth of ravines, barbed wire, and German concrete pillboxes that had been fortified for 4 years. Visibility was measured in yards, sometimes feet. For the American expeditionary forces pushing into this green abyss, the standard M1903 Springfield rifle was a liability. The long barrel caught on vines. The bolt action was too slow for aiming at shadows that moved in the peripheral vision. The Germans knew this. Their elite Stoßtruppen, stormtroopers, waited in the mist with MP-18 submachine guns and bags full of potato masher grenades, ready to ambush the Americans in the tight, winding trails. But the Germans hadn't accounted for Sergeant Miller and the shotgun squads. Miller carried a Winchester Model 1897. It was scarred, muddied, and fitted with a heat shield that looked like a cheese grater. In his pouch, he carried red paper shells loaded with .00 buckshot. He was a point man, the tip of the spear. As Miller's squad crept through the fog, the silence was shattered by the distinct thump of a German grenade launch. A stick grenade spiraled through the air, heading straight for the cluster of Americans. In a moment that would become legend, a story passed down through generations of Marines and soldiers, Miller reacted with the instinct of a man who had spent his youth hunting quail in the cornfields of Kansas. He didn't duck, he didn't run, he raised the trench broom. Boom! The shotgun roared. The cloud of buckshot intercepted the German grenade in midair, detonating it harmlessly 20 yards away. It was clay pigeon shooting, but with high explosives. Before the smoke cleared, the German ambushers broke cover, charging with bayonets and clubs, screaming to terrify the Americans. It was a shock assault, designed to overwhelm. Miller didn't hesitate. He didn't aim. He didn't fumble with a bolt. He simply held the trigger down and slammed the pump handle back and forth. Clack, boom, clack, boom, clack, boom. The slam fire mechanism turned the shotgun into a semi-automatic cannon. In under 2 seconds, Miller unleashed 5 rounds. That meant 45 heavy lead pellets swept the path in front of him. It wasn't precision fire, it was a wall of lead. The German charge didn't just stop, it evaporated. The buckshot tore through the underbrush, shredding wood and uniform alike. The psychological impact was immediate. The remaining Germans in the pillbox didn't return fire. They heard the distinct clack-clack of Miller racking a fresh round, a sound that was becoming the most terrified noise in the German army. "Alles raus!" Miller screamed, racking the slide again. The door to the bunker opened. Hands went up. The German soldiers who emerged were pale, shaking, their eyes fixed on the black muzzle of the Winchester. They had faced artillery, gas, and tanks, but this was different. This weapon didn't fight fair. It turned a soldier into executioner. In the Argonne, the laws of war had been replaced by the laws of physics, and the physics of the Model 1997 were simple. Anything in front of the barrel simply ceased to exist. As the Americans cleared the forest, bunker by bunker, they left a trail of shattered wood and broken morale. The trench broom was doing exactly what it was designed to do, sweeping the enemy from the earth. November 1918. The guns fell silent on the Western Front. The war to end all wars was over.
The trenches were filled in, the barbed wire rusted away, and the millions of soldiers went home. For most weapons of the Great War, this was the end. The bolt-action rifles, the heavy water-cooled machine guns, the biplanes, they were all destined for museums or the scrap heap. They were artifacts of a specific time and place. But one weapon refused to die. The Winchester Model 1897 didn't go into a glass case. It went into an armory, oiled and waiting. The American military looked at the trench broom and realized something profound. Close-quarters combat wasn't a fluke of trench warfare. It was the future of warfare. 23 years later, the world was on fire again. This time, the enemy wasn't the Kaiser's stormtroopers in the mud of France. It was the Imperial Japanese Army in the jungles of the Pacific. The environment had changed, but the brutality had not. The thick vegetation of Guadalcanal, the caves of Iwo Jima, and the bunkers of Okinawa were just as claustrophobic as the trenches of the Argonne. The enemy was just as determined, just as willing to charge into machine gun fire with bayonets. And once again, the rifle failed. The M1 Garand was a magnificent battle rifle, but in the dense jungle, where visibility was measured in feet, a long barrel was a liability. So the Marines dusted off the old Winchesters. They shortened the barrels even further. They loaded them with 00 buckshot, and they went back to work. On the night of August 21, 1942, during the Battle of the Tenarue River on Guadalcanal, a terrifying banzai charge erupted from the jungle. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers, screaming and firing, surged toward the thin line of Marines. In the chaos, aiming was impossible. The night was pitch black, lit only by flares and muzzle flashes. But the Marines didn't need to aim. They had the trench gun. Boom, chick, boom. The sound of the slam fire action echoed through the palms. It was the same terrifying rhythm that had cleared the German trenches a generation earlier. A single Marine with a Model 97 could hold back an entire squad. The buckshot tore through the foliage, shredding the charge before it could reach the foxholes. Japanese officers, like their German counterparts before them, learned to fear the American shotgun. They discovered that in the jungle, a weapon that sprayed 9 heavy pellets was far deadlier than a rifle that fired 1. The legacy didn't stop there. In Vietnam, the trench broom evolved again. Now called the Ithaca 370 or the Remington 870, it was carried by point men walking through elephant grass, ready to blast a Viet Cong ambush at a moment's notice. Decades later, in the deserts of Iraq and the streets of Fallujah, Marines were still breaching doors with shotguns. The technology had improved: synthetic stocks, red dot sights, tactical lights. But the core principle remained exactly the same. When the enemy is 5 feet away and trying to kill you, you don't need precision. You need overwhelming, immediate violence. The Winchester Model 1897 is the only weapon in history to be protested by a government for being too effective. It earned its nickname in the mud of France, proved its worth in the jungles of the Pacific, and cemented its legend in the sands of the Middle East. It is a testament to the brutal, simple genius of John Browning. Long after the trenches were gone, the trench broom remained, a silent guardian, ready to sweep the darkness clean.